Good day, everyone, and welcome to this session on air pollution monitoring using remote sensing. We are essentially going to use Sentinel 5P data, so keep that in mind. To begin with, let's ask a very fundamental question. What exactly is air pollution? So, air pollution refers to the presence of one or more harmful substances in the atmosphere at a concentration that is high enough to pose a risk to human health, ecosystem, or the built environment. These substances may be in the form of gases, particulate matter, or biological materials, that is, organic matter, and they can originate from a variety of sources, which can be both natural as well as anthropogenic. The key pollutants of air include nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter like particulate matter 2.5 or 10. Now, each of these has a distinct source and also causes health effects, which are as well distinct. For instance, if we talk about particulate matter 2.5, that can penetrate deep into our lungs, causing cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. It is not only restricted to humans, but is also to do with other animals that breathe. It's important to distinguish between general air contamination and air pollution. So, we will distinguish between what is air contamination and what is air pollution, how both of them are different from one another. While the atmosphere naturally contains dust, moisture, and trace gases, air pollution is going to essentially refer to an exceedance of acceptable levels that are defined by agencies like World Health Organization or National Pollution Control Boards, which means though our atmosphere is naturally contaminated with trace gases or water vapors or dust, if their level or concentration exceeds beyond a certain threshold that is provided by World Health Organization, that is WHO, or National Pollution Control Boards, then it will be considered to be air pollutant or air pollution or pollution of air. Okay. Understanding what constitutes air pollution is the first step towards effective monitoring, which means in this course we will explore how these pollutants are measured, modeled, and visualized using satellite data, beginning with an overview of their causes, types, and patterns across different regions of the world. Coming to the causes of air pollution, many of these we have already known through our previous classes in formal education as well as through news reports and other otherwise awareness of how air pollution has been affecting different cities and different countries to a critical level. Now that we understand what exactly air pollution is and how it is different from air contamination, let us move on to examine its causes, which is a critical aspect for both understanding and mitigating its impacts. Broadly, the causes of air pollution can be categorized into anthropogenic and natural. Anthropogenic or human induced sources are the primary contributors in urban and industrial areas. These include emissions from vehicles, industrial activities, power plants, construction as well, biomass burning, that is stubble burning, and even household cooking. Using fossil fuel, these processes release a range of pollutants which include but not restricted to nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matters. One of the most important anthropogenic contributors is the transportation sector. which emits fine particles and nitrogen dioxide, particularly in cities where vehicle congestion and older diesel engines are prevalent. Similarly, industrial sources such as factories, refineries, and cement plants release large volumes of gases and aerosols that degrade air quality locally as well as regionally. In contrast, if we talk about natural sources, although less frequent, so if we talk about natural sources, which are very less frequent, this can contribute significantly under very specific conditions. For example, there is forest fire. Whether they are seasonal or climate induced, forest fires will release enormous amounts of smoke and carbon particulates into the atmosphere. Next to it lies dust storms. Dust storms originating in the deserts or arid regions can transport fine particulate matters across continents or sediments across continents beyond the oceans as well. Next to it lies volcanic eruptions. Though they are rare, they do emit sulfur dioxide and ash clouds that not only pollute locally but can also affect global air quality and climate patterns. Which means it is crucial to note that these causes often overlap. For instance, human induced climate change may intensify, for example, human induced climate change may intensify the frequency and severity of natural events like wildfires, and because of which there's a feedback loop that is created and it goes on and on to pollute the atmosphere. In the next section, we will dwell into specific examples of the sources and explore how they manifest in real world cases around the globe. So, coming to these are the different polluted cities world around that were declared in 2024. We specifically come from India, and you will realize that many of our cities uh, tops the chart, which means India is on a ticking alarm of air pollution or air quality index that we always talk about. Coming to industrial emissions, we will discuss industrial emissions along with transportation emissions because in many regards they are similar or that they overlap. Industrial and transportation emissions form a core of anthropogenic air pollution. That means much of the air pollution that results due to anthropogenic causes is essentially coming from these two sectors, that is industrial and transportation sectors, and it is not just about India or any specific country, it's about the whole world. These two sectors alone account for a significant percentage of harmful atmospheric pollutants in both developed as well as developing countries. Let us begin with industrial emission. Industries such as thermal power plants, steel manufacturing, cement production, chemical refineries, as well as textile factories release a variety of pollutants that include, but is again not restricted to, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, which includes both PM 2.5 and PM 10, carbon monoxide, and a range of volatile organic compounds that we know as aerosols or atmospheric soot particles. The nature and the volume of these emissions depend on the industrial process or the kind of fuel that is used and the pollution control mechanism that is in place. In many rapidly developing regions, tax regulations and legs regulations and outdated infrastructure further exacerbate the impact of industrial emissions on local air quality. Moving to the transportation sector, this is a ubiquitous source of air pollution in urban environments. It is often known as a line source of air pollutant because our road networks or rail networks, they can be seen in the form of a line, right? That is why they have been often referred to as line contributor. Whereas if we are talking about industrial emissions, then they are referred to point sources or an area source of air pollution. So this transportation sector, which is very prominent in urban environments, emissions arise from vehicle exhaust, particularly from diesel-powered engines, which release high levels of black carbon, nitrogen dioxide, as well as fine particulates. Congestion, then poor fuel quality, and inadequate public transport systems intensifies this contribution from a transportation sector, and is essentially found in urbanized region in the form of smoke, or what we call urban smoke, and it leads to various health issues. If we talk in terms of global, transportation emissions have shown varied trend. For example, stringent vehicle emission norms in Europe and North America, many parts of Asia and Africa, rapid growth in vehicle numbers has outpaced regulatory control, resulting in worsening air quality. These emissions not only contribute to local health hazards but also play a role in regional and global climate change, particularly due to black carbon and ozone precursors. Following this section, we will explore how urbanization and its associated land use changes interplay with these emissions to shape broader pollution control. Urbanization will play a dual role in shaping air pollution. That means it works as both driver of an emissions as well as catalyst for mitigation. Essentially, it works as a catalyst for mitigation when it is managed effectively, when the urban space is managed effectively. As pollutions migrate from rural areas to urban centers, there is a significant increase in transportation demands, energy consumption, and construction activities. This lead to elevated emissions of particulate matter, carbon dioxide, and ozone precursors, and other pollutants as well. Rapid urban growth, particularly in low middle income countries, is often unplanned and poorly regulated, resulting in urban sprawl as well as traffic consumption. That means urban sprawl, if the urban area expands, then the traffic congestion is also natural to it. And resilience on fossil fuels for both energy as well as mobility. We essentially use fossil fuel, we essentially consume fossil fuels for expanding our urban regions, then for undertaking the intertrade between the cities, trade between the cities. For all this, we use fossil fuels, and that again is going to contribute more to or worsen the air pollution scenario. This contribute directly to deteriorating air quality. Informal settlements may lack clean cooking facilities, contributing further to indoor and outdoor pollution. Indoor means within home there is pollution, outdoor means outside the home or outside the house also there is pollution. Interestingly, the relationship between urbanization and pollution is non-linear. That means as the urbanization goes on increasing, as the urban area keeps on expanding, pollution need not expand. So that non-linear trend has also been identified. Various researchers show that patterns such as U-shaped or N-shaped curves where pollution levels first rise with development but then falls as policies, cleaner technologies, and awareness will improve. For instance, if we talk about a city with proactive investment in public transportation like buses or local trains or metros, and green infrastructure and air quality monitoring. These steps have been proved very successful in curbing pollution despite pollution growth. Moreover, if we talk about the structure of the urban landscape, which includes green cover, then wind corridors, and building geometries, they can also significantly influence how pollutants accumulate or disperse. In the next section, we will turn to natural sources of air pollution. So, this is a trend of how a city starts expanding, how urbanization takes place, and its trend with that of the um, ecosystem properties. So there is a village that keeps on expanding, keeps on getting urbanized, and on a long trend, you will see that it is expanding, the urbanization is expanding. But what you see is that ecosystem properties, the sustainability, uh, what do we say, this is sustainability as well comes into picture. As the city grows economically, they start investing more on sustainable practices, because of which the ecosystem properties, or in general the ecosystem properties along with that water quality or air quality also improves. Coming to biomass burning. We'll first talk about biomass burning. So, biomass burning or stubble burning is one of the most widespread natural and as natural. It is natural as well as human induced process which contributes to air pollution. It involves the combustion of organic materials such as maybe crop residue or grass or shrubs and forest undergrowth, either intentionally by humans for agricultural land clearing, or as a result of maybe wildfires. The smoke that is released will contain a complex mixture of carbon monoxide, methane, volatile organic compounds, black carbon, and fine particulate matter, both, that is 2.5 and 10. To 2.5 is more generally talked about because it is the most concerning one when it comes to cardiovascular diseases in humans, essentially infants and in um, old age people. These pollutants can travel long distances, because of which they severely degrade the air quality across the entire region. If we talk about countries like India, where biomass burning peaks seasonally, especially during the post harvest period in northern states, this is a concerning issue. The resulting haze can even be observed in satellite images, which means air pollution is so dense or the contaminants within air is at such a alarming level that even these turbidity can be observed from satellite images. Biomass burning has also contributed and will also keep contributing to climate change, as it is a significant source of greenhouses and short-lived climate pollutants. Short-lived means they eventually quickly sink down. The pollutants do not remain within the atmosphere for longer period. If the source of it is mm, concealed, that means the air pollutants will also sink to the ground or to the um, reservoir, that is maybe soil or ocean, things like that. Coming to next, that is forest fire. Forest fires are intense. They are uncontrolled fires that occur in forested or wooded areas. While they may ignite naturally due to lightning strikes or extreme heat, many are also triggered by human activities and essentially involuntary and unaware activities. Forest fires release vast amounts of particulate matter, carbon dioxide, black carbon, and toxic gases such as formaldehyde and ozone precursors. These emissions affect not only the immediate area but can drift into neighboring cities, crossing borders and impacting air quality on the transnational scale. For example, the Amazon fires, Australian bushfires, and California wildfires have all demonstrated how forest fires can become global air pollution events. They also pose several health risks, reduced visibility, and impact biodiversity while degrading the atmospheric chemistry over large areas. Next is dust storms. Dust storms are another significant natural contributors to atmospheric pollution. These events occur mainly in arid and semi-arid regions where high winds lift loose sand and dust into the atmosphere. Blowing winds will pick all those loose sediments from the ground and blow them away along with it wherever it goes. The resulting clouds of coarse and fine particulate matter, primarily particulate matter 10 and 2.5, can be transported across continents because of its lighter weight. For instance, dust from Sahara Desert frequently reaches as far as Europe and Americas across the oceans. The storms not only reduce air quality but also contribute to respiratory illnesses and visibility hazards. Satellite Satellite-based sensors, including MODIS and VIRS, play a key role in tracking the movement and intensity of such storms. Although natural human-induced desertification and land mismanagement can also amplify their frequency and severity. Next, volcanic eruptions. These are rare but very highly impactful contributors to air pollution. They release potent mixture of sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, as well as ash and other trace gases that are directly induced into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide, for example, can lead to formation of sulfide aerosols, which reflect sunlight and may also cause short-term global cooling. Large eruptions, such as those from Mount Pinatubo, which was the second largest volcanic eruption in the 20th century, that occurred in 1991. These have significantly disrupted aviation and regional climate patterns. In terms of local air quality, volcanic plumes can cause acid rain, respiratory issues, and environmental degradation. Remote sensing now, particularly using Sentinel 5P and OMI, is crucial for detecting and tracking volcanic gas emissions in near real time because of their high temporal repeativity. These air pollution levels, they are not solely determined by emission sources. They are also influenced by a range of natural and anthropogenic factors. These factors will affect how pollutants are dispersed or they are transformed from one type of pollutant to another type of pollutant or maybe a non-pollutant, and how they are deposited in the atmosphere. One of the primary influences is seasonality. Pollution index will change from one season to another. In many parts of the world, air pollutions will peak during specific times of year, such as the dry winter season in South Asia, when temperature inversion, low wind speed, and increased biomass burning lead to accumulation of pollutants near the surface, which then affect humans. However, if the pollution was to be higher up in the atmosphere, it might have not affected humans directly. Monsoon or rainy seasons, if we talk about, very typically they bring relief through natural cleansing via precipitation. As there is precipitation, the atmospheric dust particles will get uh, heavier or will um, get wet, and because of which their density will increase and they will settle down along with the precipitation. Or if it is some gas, it will get dissolved into this water and then it will come down as acid rain. Urbanization and industrialization also play a pivotal role. Densely populated areas with high traffic volumes and poorly regulated industries will often experience consistently high levels of air pollutants. The design of urban infrastructure, which includes street canyons, um, building geometries, they can also trap emissions and exacerbate exposure. So, the geometry of the building will also dictate whether the pollutants will remain in place trapped or whether they will be allowed to flow. Meteorological parameters as well, such as wind speed, wind direction, temperature, humidity, and also solar radiation, will also play significant role in the fate of air pollutants or airborne pollutants, as well as their transport. For example, high humidity can enhance the formation of secondary particulate matter, while wind can either disperse pollutants or carry them across regions, even continents. Topography is also another factor. How high or low or how irregular or planar the topography is, such as maybe valleys or basins or valleys or mountains, ridges. They can trap air masses and create pollution hotspots as well. If the air is not allowed to flow within a basin surrounded by mountains, then what will happen? The air mass will become polluted and the pollution hotspot will also form. Thus, when analyzing air pollution data, these contextual environmental factors must be considered for accurate interpretation and response planning. We will now look into how remote sensing technology allows us to monitor air pollution across such diverse environment. Air pollution monitoring through space. Remote sensing has always revolutionized how we monitor air pollution by providing very consistent, synoptic, and spatially extensive observations. That means large areas being observed at the same time. These will complement ground based monitoring networks. Traditional ground sensors, while highly accurate, ground sensors are accurate, but they are often limited in coverage and expensive to maintain. Satellite helps overcome these limitations by offering a global perspective and frequent revisit times, making it possible to detect patterns, trends, and anomalies across urban, rural, as well as remote areas. Satellites are often equipped with atmospheric sensors that can measure various pollutants including nitrogen dioxide. So these satellites are equipped with atmospheric sensors that can measure various pollutants like nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, or ozone, and also aerosols such as PM 2.5, which we have been seeing is more important. May not really sense the concentration of particulate matter 2.5, but its proxies are monitored. These observations are usually derived from changes in radiation intensity that is either absorbed or reflected or scattered by gases and particles in the atmosphere. A key strength of satellite data is its ability to detect pollution over large and inaccessible areas such as oceans or deserts or international borders. It also allows for time series analysis, which enables researchers to monitor pollution trends, seasonal variation, and the effects of policy interventions or environmental events such as lockdowns or forest fires. But Satellite data also have certain limitations. For example, most pollution detecting sensors operate in the visible and infrared spectrum, because of which their measurements can be hindered by cloud cover. If it's a visible spectrum that is being used by the sensor, then what is going to happen? If there's a cloud cover, then beyond the cloud cover or beneath the cloud cover, to what extent the air is contaminated, we won't be able to see, because this visible spectrum will be reflected back into the space by these clouds, isn't it? Because of this particular drawback, we cannot really sense what is the vertical mixing within the atmosphere, if there is any happening. These are the different limitations. But despite of these limitations, satellite based air quality monitoring has become an indispensable tool in climate science, public health planning, and environmental policy making. It also forms the backbone of global initiatives like the Copernicus Atmospheric Monitoring Service, or CAMS, and NASA's Earth Observing Systems. Let us now look at the limitations of ground based monitoring. While ground based air quality monitoring remains the gold standard for accuracy, remember that it is a gold standard for accuracy and real time detection, it is not without its limitation. It gives direct measurements, real time measurements, accurate measurements, uh, but it has its own limitations. We will look into them. So understanding these shortcomings is very essential to appreciate the value that satellite remote sensing brings to air pollution science. First, the first issue is the limited spatial coverage. Ground monitoring stations are typically located in urban centers or industrial zones, which leaves behind large villa or remote regions which are unmonitored, which go unmonitored. This will create significant data gaps, essentially in developing countries where monitoring networks may be sparse or may be entirely absent. Next is the cost and complexity of maintaining a reliable ground station that can also be prohibitive. Instruments will require regular calibration, technical expertise, and continuous maintenance. Whereas in some regions, stations may go offline for extended periods due to funding or maybe logistical constraints or resulting in discontinuous datasets. However, we are looking for continuity in datasets. Next, while ground monitors provide high temporal resolution, that is continuous data acquisition, they also offer point based measurements and not really spatial um, measurements, because the sensor might be located at one particular point and it must be measuring air contaminants, a given air contaminant over that particular region as well, that particular point itself. This will often fail to capture the broader spatial variability of pollutants, especially in dynamic environments like urban rural interfaces or maybe coastal zones. Ground based systems can face technological limitations as well. For example, certain pollutants like ammonia or mercury. These are very difficult to monitor routinely without specialized equipment. Instruments may also vary in sensitivity, which affects data consistency across regions. Finally, during emergency events such as wildfires or volcanic eruptions, access to these ground stations may be disrupted. And in these cases, satellite data becomes essential for regional or global monitoring. Now, for these reasons, an integrated monitoring framework combining both satellite as well as ground data is now considered best practice for robust air quality assessment. Let's now explore the satellite sensors which are commonly used in air pollution monitoring. The last 2 decades have been have seen remarkable progress in satellite based air quality monitoring, largely due to the development of advanced atmospheric sensors, which are onboard Earth observation satellites by NASA as well as European Space Agency, and ISRO is also nowhere behind. These sensors are so designed that they measure trace gases, aerosols, as well as matter proxies at various resolutions with revisit times. That means repeatedly the satellite will be revisiting the same place and going on monitoring what is the changes in concentration of these atmospheric pollutants. Let's first begin with MODIS, the Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer on board NASA's Terra and Aqua satellites. Although MODIS doesn't measure gases directly, it provides aerosol optical depth, or what we call it as AOD, which serves as a proxy for particulate matter levels, especially PM2.5. Another major contributor is the OMI sensor, ozone monitoring instrument, which is on board NASA's Aura satellite. This this ozone monitoring instrument will detect ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide along with aerosol index with global daily coverage. That means every day we have these satellite imageries made available by OMI, which is on board NASA's Aura satellite, and it helps us in measuring changing concentrations of ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. Now, OMI laid the foundation for the next generation of high resolution atmospheric sensors. The current gold standard is TROPOMI or TROPOMI. Full form is tropospheric monitoring instrument, which is on board European Space Agency's Sentinel-5 precursor satellite. It was launched in 2017. Propomi provides near daily measurements at a spatial resolution as fine as 5.5 to 3.5 kilometers, making it suitable for detecting pollution over cities and even large industrial complexes. It covers key pollutants including nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, CH4, and aerosols. The sensor is going to work across ultraviolet, visible, near infrared, and shortwave infrared bands. That means it has a wide band bandwidth within which the sensor operates. Other very notable sensors will include VIIRS for nighttime lights and fire detection, GOME2, which is used for detecting ozone, and IASI, which is used for measuring atmospheric composition. These satellite systems work in synergy with ground networks. That means they are also collecting data from ground stations and um, rectifying their results, calibrating the sensor, as well as atmospheric models which are running to offer very comprehensive multi-scale insights into air quality. So there are mathematical models which are working for atmospheric circulations and transport of these pollutants. There are ground networks which are monitoring concentration of these pollutants, air pollutants in real time, and continuous data is made available. Along with that, the satellite technology, all this is being used to give us a very comprehensive multi-scale insights into air quality, which is continuous data. Now, data from these sensors are increasingly accessible via platforms like we can use Google Earth Engine or Copernicus Open Access Hub, or NASA's Earth Data Portal. So these are the three portals from where we can directly access these data without any investment. Now we will just focus on Sentinel 5P satellite, which has a unique capabilities for high resolution pollution mapping, and which is also at the center of our first module. The Sentinel-5 precursor 5P satellite is commonly referred to as Sentinel-5P. It is a dedicated atmospheric monitoring session. It's a mission. It's a dedicated atmospheric monitoring mission which is developed by European Space Agency in collaboration with the Netherlands Space Office (NSO). It was launched in October 2017, and Sentinel 5P is equipped with TROPOMI, that is Tropospheric Monitoring Instrument, TROPOMI or TROPO-MI, which provides daily or near daily high resolution data on several key atmospheric pollutants. And these key atmospheric pollutants are listed over here, that is nitrogen dioxide, ozone, carbon monoxide, methane, and aerosol index. TROPOMI, this sensor, it represents a significant advancement in satellite based atmospheric observation. It offers a spatial resolution of approximately 5.5 to 3.5 kilometers that we have already discussed. That means each pixel will have these two sides, that is 5.5 and 3.5 kilometers, which makes it possible to detect pollutions at the scale of individual cities and even specific industrial zones. This resolution far surpasses that of the earlier instruments like OMI, allowing for improved localization and monitoring of emission sources. If you compare this with Landsat, you will feel it is a very coarse data, but then we can monitor concentration of these air pollutants over cities or towns or industrial regions, which are very well coming within this particular dimension. Okay. Now, Sentinel 5P monitors a wide range of atmospheric components, which includes nitrogen dioxide, which is a marker of combustion for vehicles and industries. Then carbon monoxide, which indicates incomplete combustion. Then sulfur dioxide, which is associated with volcanic activities and fossil fuel burning. Then methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas from agriculture and waste. Then wherever there is anaerobic decay process ongoing. Then ozone, which is both a pollutant as well as a stratospheric shield, the ozone layer that shields us from ultraviolet radiations. Then aerosol layer height and index. It is useful for dust, smoke, and pollution event tracking. That means if there was a volcanic eruption, in which direction the ash cloud moved, what was its speed, to what extent it will go far, and which are the regions that will be affected in the vicinity. So all this is being studied using this aerosol index or aerosol layer height and index. The satellite completes one orbit every 100 minutes. Every 100 minutes, this satellite at Sentinel 5B is completing one orbit, offering global coverage once per day. That means in one entire day, it is covering the entire planet, because of which we have the data available. With all this, we must have already known that Sentinel 5P has become an indispensable tool in atmospheric research, environmental policy making as well, and also climate science. In our hands-on session, we will use 5P data, Sentinel 5P data, or S5P data, um, to map nitrogen dioxide, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, methane, and also the aerosol index. Coming to the different data products that are available from Sentinel 5P, we are essentially talking about level 2 data products which are processed, and these are final data products that are being used. There are also raw data. However, since the data is already processed, nobody really uses raw data. You can use it if you want to extract this air contaminant concentration right from the very beginning. However, because the dataset is readily available, we are not going to dwell into it. The product is again the same. We will focus on one particular area when we try to download datasets. The portal that we are going to use is Copernicus Open Data Hub, where this data is available for free of cost. You can make an account and readily download it for the region that you are interested in. So once you go to Copernicus Open Data Hub portal, you will see these different types of level 2 data products of Sentinel 5P. First is aerosol absorbing aerosol index, AERAI, or aerosol index. The purpose of it is to detect ultraviolet absorbing aerosols such as desert dust, volcanic ash, and biomass burning smoke. It monitors air quality, volcanic eruptions it will detect, and also dust storms it will track. Aerosol index, which is unitless, it carries aerosol index which is unitless. It has high values. Its high values indicate dense absorbing aerosols. Similarly, we have aerosol layer height. Uh, it measures the mean height of this aerosol layer, which is particularly absorbing aerosol. It is absorbing ultraviolet rays. It is used for climate modeling, aviation hazard assessment, um, uh, to find out what is the altitude or the height of the volcanic ash from ground. It will measure the height of aerosol layer in terms of kilometers or pressure levels, often proportional to both, that is, the height as well as the pressure level. Next is methane CH4. It measures the methane column density within the troposphere. It is used for greenhouse gas monitoring because methane is a greenhouse gas. It also identifies from where methane is getting leaked, from which oil and gas field or from wetlands, or agriculture, because these are essentially the regions which are irrigated, and wetlands or agriculture where anaerobic decomposition is taking place, because of which methane is liberated from here. It gives a column average dry dry air mole fraction of CH4, and the unit is parts per billion. Next is cloud. Its full name you will see is cloud fraction and cloud top pressure. It detects cloud coverage and its characteristics. Um, it also corrects for trace gas, such that retrieving the amount of trace gas becomes important. And cloud climatology, it measures cloud fractures, fraction, uh, cloud top pressure, cloud optical depth, that is the density of the cloud, how dense it is, and what is its concentration probable. Coming to next is carbon monoxide. This particular product, it's a secondary product that you have to remember. It's a post-processed product. That means the processing on raw data is already done, and these are the products that are made available by S5P. So carbon monoxide column density. How dense is carbon monoxide? Is the concentration level of carbon monoxide. It measures it in ppb or moles per meter square. Um, it is measured in lower atmosphere, because as carbon monoxide goes towards the top of the atmosphere, it gets converted into carbon dioxide. So it also helps us in tracing for the in tracing gas retrievals, correcting it for retrieving trace gases, and cloud climatology. The fraction of the cloud is measured. Cloud top pressure and cloud optical thickness is also measured. Similarly, I'm sorry, cloud monoxide column density. It measures the carbon monoxide in the lower atmosphere. It's used for monitoring air pollution, wildfire emissions, urban smog, and transport modeling. Then formaldehyde, HCHO, that is a formaldehyde column density. It detects formaldehydes, which is often coming from forest fires, which is a proxy for volatile organic compound being incinerated or burning. So it is used for forest fire monitoring, biogenic emissions, photochemical smog tracking. Total vertical column of formaldehyde is noted in terms of again ppb. Then nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide also column density is extracted. It measures nitrogen dioxide coming from anthropogenic sources such as vehicles or industries or biomass burning. It is used for monitoring air quality, traffic emissions, and pollution hotspots. Um, it's again total and tropospheric column NO2, that is in terms of ppb or micromoles per meter square. NPBD3, NPBD6, NPBD7, these are near real time nitrogen dioxide products. These are real time versions of nitrogen dioxide products with different processing levels or retrieval algorithm. That means different algorithms are used to retrieve them, and different levels of processing are also used. It has a quick response for air quality forecasting and pollution event tracking. BD3, BD6, BD7 will represent different versions or bands used during NO2 retrieval. That means different processing levels are used within which different bands are used to extract all these three, as well as a different retrieval algorithm is also used. That means for detecting NO2, there are one, two, three different processes that are being used. Coming to next, which is ozone column density. Ozone column density measures the total atmospheric ozone. It is used for monitoring ozone layer recovery or ultraviolet protection studies. Total ozone column Dobson units is used for its unit. Then a tropospheric ozone column layer. This was atmospheric ozone, and now it is tropospheric ozone column layer. It isolates tropospheric ozone from the total ozone. That includes lower atmospheric ozone, which is a greenhouse gas over here. Now it is used in air quality studies and ozone pollution monitoring. It measures the ozone in troposphere in terms of Dobson units again. Then the ozone profile. It measures the vertical ozone profile, provides vertical distribution of ozone in the atmosphere. It is used in studying ozone dynamic, stratospheric tropospheric interactions, and a radiative balance. Ozone concentration at different altitudes is made available in terms of pressure level. Sulfur dioxide again in terms of column density, it detects sulfur dioxides from emitting from volcanoes or industrial pollutions or wherever there is fossil fuel being burned. Then volcanic, it is used for volcanic monitoring because that is where the sulfur dioxide is emitted. Also tracking emissions along the transportation networks. Uh, also for the socio-economic or socio-economic studies like health risk assessments. And what it measures is total vertical column of sulfur dioxide in terms of either ppb or Dobson units. So these are the different products that we will look into over the next 1 or 2 hours. These are few references that you may go through, which I have used within this PPT. You can go through these references. If you're not finding any of the PDF, do approach me and I will be more than happy to share them with you. In the next session, we will go ahead and download these different products that we discussed today of S5P. So I encourage you to make an account on Copernicus Open Data Hub. You may also make an account on Earth data. However, the portal that we will be taking up is European Space Agency's Copernicus Open Data Hub. We'll continue in the next session. Good luck.